Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Chris Varcoe with the Calgary Herald, joined by Don Braid. Don, it was a busy week in politics last week. We saw the Alberta government introduce their full royalty panel with the members. They also came out and announced there would be no royalty increases until the end of 2016. It strikes me that the government is clearly trying to respond to the fact that oil prices are plunging below $45 a barrel, and we're seeing thousands of layoffs in the oil patch. Do you think this was the right response?
I don't see how they could do anything else. They didn't have to say that royalties won't change until the end of 2016, if then. They also made the if then very clear. It's probably a pretty good compromise. There will be a study, there will be a review, but that delay was absolutely in order, and that was probably a really good move. The panel itself is really interesting too. This looks like a pretty solid panel. Mm-hmm. Peter Tertsakian is an obvious expert. The other's a nice mix of local experience from the north and the one panelist, and also the former deputy minister here. Lots of government experience on the panel, financial experience in Dave Mowat and Peter Tertsakian as well. I think generally speaking that Pat should be pretty pleased with that.
They delayed any kind of changes on royalties for a full year, which seems to be breaking a promise they made during the campaign where they would act within the first year of their term of government. But it strikes me that there's no political price to be paid here, because I don't think anybody's egging them to do something swiftly.
I'm not sure if getting a recommendation not to raise royalties and then following that recommendation would be breaking a promise, because they never actually said, at least my recollection of what Notley said during the campaign, she never actually said she would raise royalties, just that they wanted to review them to see. And, the oil patch might even get some wins out of it at the end of the day, too. They already seem to be kind of horse trading publicly in the things they say about what the patch wants, and some of those things they might well get in return for, when prices are high, somewhat higher royalties. So maybe things will cool down a bit on this front, but probably not.
Okay, let's turn to the other part of the oil dilemma, and that is oil prices sinking below $45 a barrel cuts a lot of revenue out of this government's, coffers. When we were looking at this election in May, oil was hovering in the 50s and then into the $60 range. We're now down into $40. I mean, it strikes me we've got more than $1 billion, maybe even $2 billion hole here facing Joe Ceci. What is he going to do?
Well, the problem is mammoth. Like, since the election, on a oil royalties strictly basis, $2.2 billion has been lost. Since last September, October, when things were still in the $90 range, almost $8 billion of revenue has disappeared. Now, we're not talking about the dollar. The dollar gets some of that back. Right. But what is, they're just working as hard as they can. They really are working on this, and they do have good officials in Treasury who know what they're doing. So even though Ceci's a little green on the job, he's got good backup. But I have no idea what their plan is going to be, and I don't think they really do either. They say they're just not going to talk about things now, and that may be wise. But who knows what October will bring.
Well, the Premier was in Calgary last week, and for obviously some events around the by-election and some other local events, and there really seemed to be some murkiness in her messaging about what exactly they're going to do to respond to this. On the one hand, she says they're not going to be like the Wild Rose or the other parties calling for deep cuts. Mm-hmm. They're not going to make major cuts into the civil service or really cutting public services at all. But then on the other hand, she says, well, they will look for efficiencies and cost savings. So it seems like on one side, she doesn't want to say that they're going to do deep cuts, but on the other side, she doesn't, say that they're going to rule out making any spending. What are the voters to think?
Well, I'm not sure. One thing she did say was one solution is not to go after the civil service and lay off a bunch of people. And yet, remember back in the spring, Jim Prentice identified the civil service as a $2 billion problem, basically. Right. $2 billion in extra spending that they didn't feel we could afford then. So it's hard to know, how do you deal with it without touching some of these things, whether it's the civil service or other departments or programs. We don't know.
A lot of this also seems to tie into the by-election, which will take place on Thursday in the Calgary foothills. We really see this campaign focused on jobs and the economy, and it kind of comes back to what we were just saying about the Premier saying, we're not going to look at deep cuts within the government. We're not going to be looking to lay more people off and make this situation worse. It strikes me that the by-election sort of is overshadowing everything going on these days.
Well, it's very interesting they didn't introduce the royalty regime panel until a week before the by-election, or actually 6 days before the by-election. And when they did, it turned out to be a pretty industry-friendly looking panel. So they may have left it so late, they delayed it a week. They may have left it just to have some further impact on the by-election. The PCs are looking a little stronger than we thought they would look. And the message after this by-election is over might be to the PCs and Wild Rose, you think about it, guys, unite, because the NDP might get elected because of another split on the right. On the other hand, there's no certainty at all. I'm not sure that Hawksworth's campaign has really taken off.
Well, the poll that was done for the Calgary Herald showed in the Calgary foothills that it was a very tight race. The Wild Rose slightly ahead of the NDP, who were slightly ahead of the Tories. So I guess it's really going to depend on who can get their votes out come election day.
Exactly.
So, Don, that brings us to our winners and losers segment of the week in Alberta politics. Who was your winner?
I'd say the political wing of the oil patch. Not the patch itself, because prices are still $40 for oils. That's not good. But on the royalties front, they definitely won one with this deferral of royalties to the end of 2016, perhaps no change even then. And with a royalty panel that clearly is going to have some serious understanding of what the problems are. So they did okay.
I agree. I think, the Energy Minister, Mark McQuaig-Boyd, delivered a good panel. I think she instilled some confidence in where she's going, and she, comes off as a very mature voice who's willing to learn, and it has no preconceived notions. I think that's going to make most people feel pretty good, at least right now, about where this royalty panel is going. So she's my winner of the week. Who's your loser?
I would have to say Darren Bylis, the Municipal Affairs Minister, who took a very lukewarm approach to this case of government managers fixing contracts so people they knew and were familiar with and comfortable with could be rehired and hired to do these IT jobs. There's a case for firing. Just come out there and say, yeah, this government's a little different. We're actually going to fire people who do things clearly wrong in government. But it was just your standard. If somebody does something in government, they never get identified, never get nailed.
All right. Well, my loser of the week, I'm going off the board here, and it is former Deputy Premier Thomas Lukaszuk. Most people know that the former, MLA from Edmonton is a very charming individual. I think everybody likes Thomas, particularly in the media, because he's so quotable. But one of the strengths of Thomas over the years has been his loyalty to the PC brand. He's been there for decades. He was an MLA for many years. But this week, he decided to muse about the fact that maybe we need to start a new party. He no longer seems to be interested in running for the PC leadership, which seemed to be the case a couple of months ago. It seems like he's kind of jumped the shark here a bit in terms of where's the loyalty. He's active on Twitter. It strikes me that this is sort of a bizarre development for him.
It's working for Donald Trump.
Thanks, Don.